I want to introduce our speaker today. Anthony Cudahy is an artist who makes paintings of people, sometimes in groups or pairings, but often solitary figures. I found a 2021 Hyperallergic review, a review published in Hyperallergic written by Sebastian Zinn, that was talking about a solo show he had that year at Semio's gallery in Paris. And Zinn wrote, "Characters from art history, queer archives, and personal photographs fill compositions on canvas and paper." The Brooklyn-based painter, Anthony Cudahy's approach to mimesis, which means a kind of reproduction of the real. His approach to mimesis is as closely attuned to the ageless postures and gestures of his subjects as it is to their physiognomies, their postures and gestures, but also the shapes of their bodies and faces. By demonstrating the extent to which human behaviors are both learned and transient, these fictionalized scenes express an indisputable truth. As discrete individuals, we are merely vessels for the habits and beliefs which we accumulate in our lifetimes. It's not often that you read something so perceptive and thoughtful in a review. And I realized I couldn't say it better. Anthony has had solo exhibitions at GRIMM, a gallery that represents him currently in Amsterdam and New York, at Hales Gallery in New York and London, a solo show at the Ogunquit Museum of American Art in Ogunquit, Maine, the Cap Center d'Art de Saint-Fons in France, the Musée des Beaux-Arts de Dole in France, Semio's Gallery, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, in Paris, several solo shows at 1969 Gallery in New York, and Geary, which used to be in New York and is now up in Millerton, Connecticut. Geary Gallery. Group shows at Delhi Gallery in New York, the Museum Kampa in Prague, Czech Republic, the Courtauld Gallery in London, the Dallas Museum of Art in Texas, Pace Gallery in Hong Kong, Flag Art Foundation here in New York, Hales Gallery in Zurich, Pond Society in Shanghai, ICA Miami in Florida, Lyles and King here in New York, Half Gallery also in New York, Alush Benias Gallery in Athens, PPOW Provincetown, and also the Provincetown, what was it called? The other institution in Provincetown where you showed? I'm sorry.
It was a historical house.
Yes, I thought that was interesting, but somehow it didn't make it onto my bio. James Fuentes Gallery, that was virtual, presumably during the pandemic. Perrotin Gallery here in New York, the Knockdown Center in Queens, and last but not least, Vox Populi, an amazing artist-run community space in Philadelphia. His work has been reviewed or discussed in the Brooklyn Rail, Portland Press Herald, Interview Magazine, Frieze, Elephant, Wallpaper, Plaster Magazine, Bomb Magazine, Hyperallergic, the Paris Review, Juxtapose, and T Magazine of the New York Times. His work is widely collected, and he's one of those artists whose work is also resold at auction, which is worth knowing, but maybe not spending too much time thinking about. He earned an MFA from Hunter College, a BFA from Pratt Institute. Please join me in welcoming Anthony Cudahy.
Thank you, Mark and SVA, Isabel, and Nelson for inviting me to speak at your MFA lecture series. I'd like to talk about a body of work that was exhibited just this past September through October at GRIMM Gallery's Amsterdam space. And to use this body of work as a jumping off point to talk about echoes and iterations within my paintings and image histories in general. This will be a more associative talk, one that I hope can give context to the work in this particular show, and also context for how I think about images acting as sort of generative threads connecting across time. The show was titled Ceaseless Arranger and comprised of several oil paintings and smaller works on paper made during the previous year. Early on in the making of the show, I drew a figure at the edge of a wall. He's posed as if he might be opening a door. He's reaching or gesturing towards something, maybe offering something. It's the exact kind of open image that I love. I want the elements of narrative. I want to gesture towards narrative, but without a fixed and overbearing locked meaning. I want to create generative images. I immediately knew this figure would end up echoing in multiple works. By the time I looked at the paintings and art objects at the Met's 2024 Siena Painting Show, this image had already begun to mutate and replicate in my mind. In one Duccio panel, the devil points downwards from the balcony of a temple. In the biblical story, he's tempting Jesus to jump and have angels catch him. This would give definitive, measurable proof to the people watching that he was indeed the Messiah. Such a similar pose with such a different context. This pointing at, gesturing towards, opening could hold so many narratives. In another work, 4 interior figures make a chain, each almost touching the next. I saw that first leftmost interior figure as echoing my reaching figure. This is a scene from Ambrogio Lorenzetti's Stories from the Life of Saint Nicholas. One of the curators of the Siena show, Stephen Wilholgen, explains, Ambrogio uses architecture, urban, domestic, and ecclesiastical, to anchor his narratives. The first is a scene of Christian charity. Saint Nicholas gives dowries to 3 maidens. In it, we see Nicholas, born to rich parents, sharing his wealth by placing gold wrapped in a piece of cloth through the window of his neighbor's house, after hearing that the father, whose financial fortune had been lost, was considering forcing his 3 daughters into prostitution to attain their dowries. This is the most direct of the 4 scenes, and Ambrogio engages us with the figure of the young saint, springing on tiptoes to reach into the window to distribute his life-altering gift. I began to wonder about chains of interaction and if it's ever possible to know if an action has a net good effect. Does a bad end to a relationship negate the previous love? Did it help? Did it harm? In this painting's left side, I follow the poses of the Ambrogio grouping and simplify his dollhouse-like interior. Instead of currency being exchanged, there's an ambiguous rope or chain that connects each of the figures. What if the nuance or complications our togetherness creates? Poison as a curative or medicine as a poison, an injury that leads to a strengthening versus a treatment that leaves the patient weakened indefinitely. My husband Ian woke up one morning in late July with his eye painfully sealed shut, encrusted and inflamed. After an emergency referral to an ophthalmologist, he was diagnosed with a corneal ulcer. By the second day, the fluid that had accrued on the surface of one eye had made Ian so light sensitive that he could do nothing but lay in the darkened bedroom with a blanket over his face. Daily doctor visits, a multitude of eye drops and medications, and 4 days to heal. It was as if it didn't happen. A few scant milligrams is the size of a corneal ulcer, and the eye can heal incredibly quickly. This tiny, brief demon imposed itself, dominated a week, and then traveled on. Ever since I was a teenager, I've had ocular migraines, usually a few a year. Half of my vision will suddenly be gone. Then my brain rushes to fill the missing visual information with what is called a scintillating scotoma. Curved lightning bolt patterns, impossibly sharp at their culminating point, vibrate in a sick static. This slowly dissipates as my vision returns. At this point, some other frightening symptoms can happen, like aphasia or numbness of the extremities. Finally, the migraine sets in. Everything had been leading to that. On one hand, I do feel fortunate to be able to experience a visual phenomenon that many do not. When thinking about observational painting, I enjoy the idea of including an ocular migraine. Like everything else in the composition, this is how my brain has organized my perception of the world. I want to describe the edges of the scotoma with as much care as the several greens observed on the side of a cantaloupe. A less positive view that I also feel is that ocular migraines are a demon attached to me for life. At 19, the then undiagnosed migraines presented in symptoms that had me visit an ER to then be bounced around from specialist to specialist in a 2-week-long hospital stay. So many possibilities were thrown at me, from TIAs to MS. When I finally saw the hospital's head of neurology, he brought a group of medical students to teach how to diagnose benign ocular migraines. I felt relief and emptied after being on view for so long and processing so many worst-case scenarios. Much of my 20s was spent under a fog of hypochondria, OCD. An ocular migraine wasn't just the visual interruption, it led to panic attacks and endless checking in day-to-day living. In Dr. Yan Liu's 2021 study, Healing with Poisons, Potent Medicines in Medieval China, the word poison is discussed as having an original meaning closer to the contemporary usage of potency. The classifications and dividing lines of poison and medicine were, in medieval China, not a fixed, unchanging essence, but relational. Dr. Liu writes, the concept of absolute poison, by contrast, never arose in pre-modern China. The use of toxic substances had constituted the core of Chinese pharmacy since its inception, and it remained so throughout the imperial era. No better example illustrates this divergence than the distinct fates of aconite in Greek and Chinese pharmacies. In De Matura Medicina, aconite, also called wolfsbane, is described as only a poison to kill wolves, without any curative value. The Greek physician offers treatment for accidental aconite poisoning no less than 17 times in his text, suggesting that he included the toxic plant simply to warn against its use. But in China, aconite was highly valued for its therapeutic value and even hailed as the lord of 100 drugs. This does not mean there was no knowledge of the danger of poison in China. Quite the opposite, we find abundant discussion of poison detection and treatment in classical Chinese pharmacy. Yet, unlike the study of absolute poisons as substances fundamentally different from medicines in medieval Europe, the understanding of poisons remained an integral part of pharmaceutical knowledge in pre-modern China. This striking divergence of European and Chinese pharmacy likely derived from their distinct therapeutic rationales. If European physicians considered toxicity to be the cause of unpleasant side effects, Chinese healers deemed it to be the very source of curative power. In other words, European medicine prescribed poison in spite of their toxicity, Chinese medicine because of it. In Did I Harm, Did I Heal? Ian absent-mindedly touches the barb of a rough cocklebur, another plant that has various medicinal uses, while being dangerous to consume in larger quantities. He is placed next to the people chain in a tableau of uncertain cause and effect. I've long been interested in image symbols of corrective actions imposed by humans on trees and plant life, like those to straighten and to graft. Nicholas Andre in the 18th century chose this image to be the logo for the first group of European orthopedic scientists. In the inability to know another, Paul and bound tree, I incorporate this symbol into a composition. It's painted solidly with defined edges in contrast with Paul on the right, who is dissolving into the light and the color that enters the painting. Between the tree and Paul, there's a stencil-like graphic plant. This symmetrical mutated plant is a symbol I've used across years of my work, thinking about the cell splitting and symmetry as the basic process of life, but something that unchecked leads to collapse. Again, the repeated pose is here. I feel like Paul is reaching for something boundless in response to the control in the left side of the painting. In other works in the show, the pose continues to echo and shift, becoming an arc or the structure of graphic zones of color. Another area that I like to work iteratively is through repeated portraits of the same figure, often important people in my life. I've always been sort of agnostic when it comes to the ability to transmit the sitter's soul or truth. Here in these paintings of the painter Jenna Gribbin, she is in the role of the artist as archetype. On the left, I wanted to show an aspect of painting that was outside of a traditional studio portrait. The idea of pointing to other works across time is integral to oil painting. Then I flipped and I wanted to do a very direct artist portrait, organized and very straightforward. I think in one painting, it's maybe possible to describe only some small portion or characteristic of someone. It's really a moment in time and it's completely subjective. However, maybe through repeated portraits, a painter can begin to get at that idea of truly transmitting information about the subject. Here in my paintings of the poet Sami Iet, alternate between mundane and straightforward to more active and allegorical. Here, the painter Lily Wong sits, organizes, pushes an evil bundle of snakes downward. Taken together, these paintings of Alex show a calmness and presentness that I feel that they inhabit in the world. But still, so much of another is unknown. Multiple portraits begin to reference and build meanings with each other, informing and changing the previous ones. I've painted and drawn Ian hundreds of times, but even the person you're closest to, you can never know. I had painted one of Duccio's Temptation Presenting Satans before in a 2022 painting titled Only the Devil Could Enjoy. In this painting, the Satan figure is observing a Northern Lights type phenomenon. A key conflict in the center of my pieces like this is a certain ambivalence about the act of painting itself. I cycle through every judgment and stance about pursuing the medium, painting as a limpid action, a waste of time and energy in the political moment, painting as communing on a wavelength across time and space, inherently human and unavoidable, painting as useless decoration, painting as propaganda, pointed and filled with the potential to harm. Who could enjoy beauty in a moment like this? I suppose a devil, but maybe it's not wrong. Iterations across a body of paintings allow for many angles on a subject, allow you to sit in a place of ambivalence indefinitely. In some ways, that's how I picture many ideas functioning, like poses, image histories, symbols. These also vibrate and continue across time, generating new pathways, constantly shifting position and meaning, like a virus spreading, leaving artifacts across DNA. I think of mass psychogenic illness. I think of odd sympathy. I think of plants communicating through chemicals and vibrations. Images are contagious, and they also never exist free from the web of other images. Trying to wield this to make one further image in a chain is an impossibly futile task. Steve Dillon, writing on the lyrical quality of Derek Jarman's films, explains this process. Poetry attempts to emerge from the wreck, from the confines and ruin of dogma, but it runs over itself and collapses in the course of its own transcription. I try to arrange in my paintings, or as Dodi Bellamy writes, I experience existence as a boundless expanse of dirt, and I'm a worm burrowing through it, gorging it on one end, shitting it out on the other. AI then is a version of this, but it's more similar to the sick, free radical cell, uncontrollably multiplying. Adam Curtis declares that the tool haunts us in our own dreams, with our own dreams, fantasies, and absurd drunken things we've said one night. It mashes them up and plays them back to us like a weird avalanche of phantasms. I wonder, is there a scarier image echo than the witch awakened in the classic 1960 horror film Black Sunday? It's a story of generational haunting in which a witch, Asa, is killed by her brother and curses the family's lineage. Every 100 years, she attempts to take the body of one of her descendants, who double her likeness. Each version is played by the actress Barbara Steele. The film is primarily set 200 years later, and Asa's descendant Katya has long been haunted by her literal image. There's a painting in her home of the witch that she has feared her entire life, calling it a flame that I cannot escape. Images are powerful in this filmic world. In the beginning scene, Asa's brother simply doesn't kill his sister. He nails the mask of Satan with interior-facing metal nails into her face to try to disfigure the likeness. However, it recurs and is inescapable. Her father at one point cries, all this resemblance, this repeating of Asa's vengeance that terrorizes me. Countering this, only the image of a crucifix or the icon of a saint are potent enough to repel the witch and her possessed and controlled undead soldiers. What is so terrifying about this image is that it's inherent to Katya. At one point, she states, I feel a sense of terror, a presentiment of death, of being destroyed by something that is inside me. It's the terror of every family. Which traits seem inescapable across generations? Addiction, abuse, these haunt across years. In this way, Catherine Breillat's 2001 film Fat Girl shares a mythic structure similar to the two Ari Aster films of Familial Destiny and Unavoidable Fate, Hereditary and Midsommar. Breillat's film is revealed in the last act to operate with a fairy tale logic. That undercurrent of hatred of and punishment for girls and women that sits within all of our oldest stories. Early in Black Sunday, Katya plays a discordant note on the family piano, which echoes strangely and causes howling to erupt outside. I think again of free radicals and tipping points, the potential energy waiting to be released within the piano, the interior chords tightly strung. A flock of pigeons lives on the roof of a building I can see from my studio window. Periodically, they seem restless and circle in the air, gliding by as I observe. Birds and flocks always seemed like one larger organism to me, gracefully expanding and retracting in the wind. I'm usually alone when I'm painting. I tell myself this fits my disposition. I need solitary time to process, the space to arrange the chaos into something that makes sense. I've always related to the distance Bruegel takes from his hills and his cities. I've always preferred to be near and listen to a group rather than speak myself. There's a scene early in Derek Jarman's The Garden of an unnamed gay couple spending time on a rocky beach. The film returns again and again to this water and the shore. They throw rocks, laugh, sit, and embrace by a boat run aground. There's an ease and gentleness to the care they give each other. Interspersed with these bright outdoor scenes are scenes from a dim candlelit room. Tilda Swinton's character is in here, making eye contact with the camera. I believe that she is seeing and reacting to the two men, not to the audience. She eventually screams and snuffs out the candle. It's unclear whether she is terrorized with the foresight of the bigotries and assaults that await the two men, or if she herself is a representation of a familial homophobia. I pose Aaron and Jack in that couple's embrace, particularly the moment their arms suggest an infinity symbol. In this painting, titled The Lover's Triumph of Death, I wanted them to be a closed circuit, folding in on themselves. Bruegel's The Triumph of Death, circa 1562, is a painting I've pulled from several times over the years. The lover musicians in the bottom right-hand corner are oblivious to the apocalypse surrounding them. Often I've pulled from this painting to explore a particular guilt for making art during world crises, or an obliviousness of upwardly mobile and assimilated gay men. But this time I wanted it to strike an ambivalent chord. A closed circuit can also be a place of safety and understanding. Being completely present with another is so counter to the solipsistic, algorithmic scrolling that we spend our days. Can insisting on love and presence, despite calamity outside, be generative and actually open the couple up to being more engaged with the world? In a church thrift shop in Florida, I found a self-published guide to quilting, focused particularly on traditional wedding patterns. The double wedding ring pattern stuck out to me. Obviously, any quilt is a mathematically infinite scalable sort of math equation, but I loved how this wasn't simply two rings representing marriage. The pattern suggests that a true coupling opens the individuals to being present in a larger and larger network. The book that I painted in front of the couple is open to a spread from this pattern's instructions. And in a smaller corresponding piece, The Lover's Marriage Quilt, the apocalyptic wasteland has regrown, thriving with greenery. The quilt hangs completed on the wall. Below it are two skulls. Beyond a coupling, beyond a lifespan, we are part of an immensely complicated network. Counterintuitively and counter to the medium that I'm working in, I was drawn back to sound in these paintings. I could hear moments of them. The high-pitched pluck of the two-taut guitar wire snapping, shocking and slightly dangerous. The sharp edge of the string can slice. My friend Lily tells me that when she played violin growing up, it was even scarier, the strings being so close to your face. A sound that announces a state change. Beyond the wall, I hear static and the brush fire burning, an industrial hum. I imagine the sound of Philip Guston's 1978 painting Kettle to be one without a listener. The opposite of hearing, it may be the saddest painting that I know of. I imagine the teapot steam whistling in an abyss where no one can ever hear or react to it. I allow this kettle to intrude in the painting Ian reflected Guston Kettle. Ian here is locked into a crystalline composition. He's the closed circuit of sharp reflection. The kettle, still maybe in another world, is not an alarm call heard. In Eileen Miles's 2000 novel, Cool for You, the poet discusses sound several times. at one point suggesting that each past sound or vibration is in a sort of infinite present, still happening now, just further away. They write, I believe in sound. It's the tiniest shaking. When the colors are gone, the smells disperse, the shaking continues. Its effect is infinite, standing in a bowl of sand and fine reed and wind, which is something I do not understand. The lap, lap, lap of the water speaking to the moon, the struggling bug. Nothing in the world staying still. Every dropped ruler in a classroom 40 years ago is a tingling moment rushing past Mars. My dog comes running, and we return to the car. The click of my tooth on cement. Composers say the sounds of the orchestra playing on the Titanic can still be heard someplace on the bottom of the sea, maybe not even the very bottom, but pretty far down, and not just one spot, but throughout. The tiny sound of orchestra music as some people got to the boats. There were a few, not enough, but the signal was heard. Eileen Miles even ascribes generative potential to sound. About the gurgling planet Venus, they write, sometimes it seems possible that the sound created the planet, those steamy conditions, rather than the other way around. This earlier painting is in reference to a 2004 song cycle made by the composer Nico Moli, titled The Only Tune, which was itself inspired by a traditional folk song, The Two Sisters. Versions of this story vary, but most entail one sister killing the other, pushing her into a river, maybe out of jealousy or anger. A third figure finds her body and makes musical instruments from her body parts, hair for strings, bones for flutes. But the only songs that these instruments play sound dreadful. Daniel Stephen Johnson writes about this song cycle of Molly's. What most of these songs have in common is this musical necromancy, fashioning a dead body into a musical instrument. Molly uses the morbid tableau as a metaphor for acts of violence and dissection inherent in any folk song arrangement. I think this folk story expresses the generative and often violent possibilities of genre and medium. All paintings exist in relation to what came before, and they are in dialogue with those previous works. How they interact, subvert, honor, degrade, misunderstand, and transform that older work is up to the artist and the cultural environment they find themselves in. The Nico Moli song cycle itself builds from and cannibalizes itself, becoming more and more layered and discordant as the song continues. I had long been obsessed with this cycle and wanted to make a work in response to it. I directly cite the song cycle in sheet music on the table. In this way, this painting is also a reference to Caravaggio's The Musicians. And I wanted the musical notation to be legible and playable, like Bach's But song. I'm interested in paintings as containers for usable information, so it was important to me that the notations were accurate. None of my searching online was productive. There was no accessible sheet music, something that made sense when I learned that the recorded cycle was a studio work and not something that had transcriptions made for live performances. Thankfully, it's an incredibly small gay world, and a friend of a friend was able to connect me with Nico, who was kind enough to retroactively make these sort of pseudo transcriptions of the first few moments of the cycle. The two figures are stepped in the composition, mirroring the staircase behind them. This refers to the building on top of that art making does. The flute held in the hand is half bone, half flute, like some of the first instruments ever found, which were flutes made from human thigh bone. I'd like to end with a large painting that I semi-jokingly made as a manifesto called Against Gardening, with an exclamation point at the end. As if this esoteric and open-ended symbolic triptych could ever be legible and direct like a political slogan. The title of the painting refers to an essay by Patricia DeVries titled Against Gardening, in which she uses gardening to discuss our ultimately destructive need to order, enclose, and demarcate, and the violence inherent in that way of organizing the world. A big theme that's been present in my work is trying to counter or just sit with this need we have as a people to categorize and separate ourselves from nature and create hierarchies of life. In the center panel, I quote from a medieval French book, which shows various rural professions. It's all gridded and controlled, and things are purposefully separated. The imposed zones interested me. The two figures, right panel and background of the middle panel, stand outside of this graphic forced perspectival zone. The plants in the constructed space are mostly referring to tapestry flowers, symmetrical and patterned, but the one tree kind of jutting out is a sort of culmination to me of all this ordering. Within the tree is a very simplified diagram of what happens when an atom is split. The left panel is a counter scene, a different mood. The figure is similar to the tapestry plants in that he's duplicated or twinned or mirrored. The contents of the tableau above each refer to objects and beings that complicate the way we have separated ourselves from nature. All the way to the top left is a dowsing stick used for water divining. There's the branch from a touch-me-not plant, which is sensitive and habitually learns to react to stimuli. The print on the wall is from this sort of tradition in the Netherlands in the 17th century, creating these landscapes that are both portraits, are also portraits in like optical illusions. And this plays on pareidolia, which is the brain's ability to find faces in nature. Think of the outlet as a shocked face. This is an earlier painting that I tried to make a pareidolic figure in. The figure in the left panel is starting to become one of those pareidolic figures. His hand coils into a shell, and a fern outlines one arm. Another image echo is the star constellation above the figure on the right, is Canis Major. So it's an echo of the dog in the middle panel, lower middle panel. So one of the challenges of giving a lecture about my own paintings is there are no paintings here in the room. So much of my painting is in decisions that are best, and in some cases, only visible in person. The lack of surface lends me to go down peripheral ideas behind the work. I think this is a strength of the lecture format. The most effective artist talks I've ever been to were part of a lecture series provided by the Bruce High Quality Foundation University. A decade ago, the anonymous group of artists behind the conceptual art project Bruce High Quality formed a free art school in New York City. For me, this was incredibly significant. In undergrad, I did a communication design program, and other than foundation year, didn't really have any painting-centric classes or conversations beyond friends who were also painting. At Bruce, I took classes led by Nicole Wittenberg that opened my practice up. It's when I really began to think of painting, the painting surface, and realized how complicated it is. I also took a class called 1000 Paintings. It was organized by Sean J. Patrick Carney in 2016. Each week of a 10-week semester, a different artist would present 100 paintings that were especially significant to them. It was like a biography by way of works the artists were drawn to over their painting lives. The artists he brought in were truly insane. Charlene Von Heil, Dana Schutz, Jennifer Packer, Sam McGinnis. I learned so much from what these painters saw in the paintings that they loved and were affected by. So I wanted to end this artist talk with a compact version of the 1000 Paintings class and talk about 10 paintings that have impacted me during various stages of my painting life. In high school, I happened across a Denny Saville monograph in the art section of the Fort Myers, Florida Barnes and Noble. And everything changed for me. I loved painting, looking at paintings and making them, but I had never been so connected to the way the paint was put down on the surface and the commitment to the figure. I've always primarily been interested in the figure, but truly had no conception of it being a contemporary artist who painted it. I was obsessed with her. I made a mini archive on my computer of images categorized by years. I scoured the internet for any paintings she had made that I hadn't seen before, many errant blogs and low res JPEGs. I loved her monumental bodies, the plainer way that she described form, while always allowing for accidents and slippage with her application. The color, of course. This particular painting stuck with me, however. The directness of the crop and the pose, the frozenness of the expression. It feels as if something truly significant has occurred, and this is the second that a realization registers. She also painted several versions and iterations of this over the years. She was an early example to me of an artist making iterative art from images that were potent to her. Seville led me to other living painters, Lucian Freud being one of her influences. Freud was probably the biggest influence on my painting because I really studied his paintings. I made copies of them, I made copies of his drawings. The planar mode of describing form I saw in the Seville paintings was explored by him over decades of making. The colors he used, my first palettes were based on trying to match those. I made many paintings in Freud's hand. This painting of Leigh Bowery was for several years part of the Met's contemporary painting hang, so I saw it in person countless times. It feels so tender to me. I never got the feeling of alienation from his portraits, which is sometimes described. I feel like his close looking was loving. Also important here was the studio as a setting, body as containers for marks and color. When Freud passed in 2011, the Met quickly put up a memorial show, and this painting was part of it. When I finished undergrad in 2011, it was right around peak zombie formalism. Painting, and specifically representational or figurative painting, really was looked down on and not taken seriously in a way that feels impossible today to describe with how much that sentiment has shifted. If you were painting, there had to be these conceptual frameworks behind your project or other signals that you were serious, like really restricting your color palette. I was making a lot of paintings inspired by Luc Tuymans, who I still love, by the way, but it was this sort of self-imposed graying down and desaturating of my palette. Loud, romantic, sensual colors felt unserious, and I felt wrong for gravitating towards garish ones. That's why an artist like Marlene Dumas was so significant to me. Color in her painting is overflowing, supernatural, irrational, infectious. She broke color for me. How a vivid purple inexplicably on a forehead could feel so moving. This painting in particular was important for me, both for the color and the way she sets up a narrative, or how she leaves narrative open. It was recently up at that Zorner circa 95 show, and seeing it in person only reaffirmed its power. I love the title, the fact that the titular visitor isn't in the frame. Are they through the lit door, or are we as the viewer the visitor? Also, her painting of Amy Winehouse is one of the best paintings ever made. This painting, Dana Schutz's Building the Boat While Sailing, was part of her 2012 show at Petzl. At the time, I was working a terrible concierge job in the Chelsea Piers, and I would go to the show before or after my shifts. I probably visited this painting 10 times. I was completely obsessed with how drawing and brush marks work within her paintings, how it veers from calligraphic to descriptive. The color was wild. It feels like a painting that took on too much, but is better for that built-in failure. There are figures drilling holes into the boat, spitting water back out into the ocean. There's an upside down man basically in a crucified position. There's a figure shaving wood away with their teeth like a beaver. There are boat plans that are getting wet. It feels like an allegory for painting, but also just for trying to find your way through life. The poetics of this painting made an impression on me. Although so much of my life was formed by engaging with the internet or being on the internet, the longer I paint, the more the experience of seeing painting, not on the screen, but in real life, becomes important. This room was installed at Chris O'Feely's new museum show in 2014 called Night and Day. It's his Blue Rider series, and it's almost impossible to photograph. I was beginning to really understand the surface of a painting as a sort of composition, itself layered amongst others, like the drawing or the color in this like sort of complex matrix. These paintings of Ophelia leave you with almost only the surface. The color and the tones have been rendered so limited and close that it's only in the paint handling and the different tubes of paint's drying times and characteristics and personalities that you can really latch on to distinguishable imagistic things going on. Chris O'Feely is one of my favorite artists, but the experience of this particular painting series was exceptional. To see aspects of these paintings, you had to move your body around the room. You had to try to use the low lighting situation to your advantage, catching any glare. At one point, I was practically on the floor trying to see these images. Another Green World is a painting that simply wedged its place into my brain. I feel like I've been responding to this Nicole Eisenman painting for years. The revelatory thing for me about her images and this grouping in particular is that each figure is in their own universe. The way Eisenman treats her surface was also important to me. Every person, every object has a character to it, and the way it's painted adds to that. My husband and I also have matching tattoos of the line drawing of the dancing couple in the center of the painting. As I was trying to figure out how to get more information and references and sources into my paintings, being able to view and consider my friend Anna Glance's paintings was significant. Her paintings combine so many subjects and ways of rendering or painting. To me, it doesn't feel like pastiche or like a postmodern exploration of genre. The shifts in subject matter and rendering style seem inherent to the strange narratives that she's telling. Matisse had one of the bather paintings from Cézanne over his bed. And he said that he said that the strangeness of that painting sustained him over the years. I feel the same about Anna's work. While in grad school at Hunter, I took an incredible course with the art historian Maria Lowe called Love and Death in Italian Art. It focused on the late Middle Ages, but the text that we read and Lowe's own perspective on the paintings of the time showed how strange and transgressive the period was when it was stripped of its Enlightenment era recontextualization. Titian became maybe my favorite painter ever through this class. Thinking of the Touch Me Not plant, this Titian painting is the moment Mary Magdalene sees the resurrected Christ and rushes to touch him, but he rejects her as he is no longer part of the same physical world that she is. Titian uses Jesus's walking stick to literally separate Mary Magdalene from him via a visual barrier. It's graphically narrative. He could paint anything from the lace to the foliage in the scene, and his late paintings are muddy and thick, but still so about the surface and portraying different textures and forms in paint. Every window I paint, I feel is a tribute and a reference to Lois Dodd. Her economy is remarkable in color, in mark, in form. Her work really resists language, which I think is a strength. Matthew Marks in 2018 had a group show called Painting Now and Forever Part 3, and that's what introduced me to her work and her hand, and that made an indelible impression. The last painting I'll show is from a very recent art viewing experience this past week at Jennifer Packer's show Dead Letter at Sycamore Malloy Jenkins. This painting in particular feels like it's utilizing the picture plane as a container for information. The surface is a web that things get stuck in. I think about Annunciation paintings of the past and how they relate to receiving bad news on the phone. This painting has the emotional zone or the emotional register of missing a step. Everything is floating in anxiety. On the table, a pair of scissors stand on its blades, balancing or about to fall, and next to them, a hand holds a model of a house. I think about the piano form in the background as a casket, and the fact that the sounds the piano made during its use are still echoing somewhere in the universe. Thank you.